Let's welcome our first speaker for the opposing team. Salinity is not a barrier to production is the topic. Please make her welcome. Cess McConnell, everyone.
30 years. 30 years, and we haven't solved this problem. Salinity is, I don't know, you cannot say that it is not going to be a barrier to our production. Let me reel off a few things. News release, mid-90s or late 80s, National Landcare Program. Next news release, 93, the National Dryland Salinity Program. Next news release, 1997, National Heritage Trust. 2000, the National Action Plan on Salinity and Water Quality. We've had CFOC, we're back to NLP. Salinity is an issue to production. We have not invested over the last 30 years millions, billions of dollars in salinity if we thought it was something we could deal with. There are many people, not just the government, but most of the people in this room that believe salinity has had some impact and they need to deal with it. There's been surveys, there's been drill holes, there's been countless amounts of individuals' time, effort, money spent trying to get over this production issue. But it's still here. Those surveys show us a whole lot of things. It still rates up there with farmers, up with the cost price squeeze, pretty important. It's ahead of issues in some instances, such as herbicide resistance. When I was looking through the figures in terms of investment, for every $100,000 invested by the government, there was another $500,000 in kind. I think it's important to people. I don't think we have the answers yet. Having spent a fair bit of time drilling and looking at groundwaters across this state, I know that it affects a large part of our landscape. On average, farms in the wheat belt have around 5% salinity. In some areas on our valley floors, that's much more, could be up to 30%. In hazard areas of over 50%. Have we solved this issue? Now, 30%, can you imagine not having your kitchen? Our esteemed team here would perhaps suggest to us that we should eat off the floor. You're not worried about that kitchen. But as I said before, government has invested an awful lot of money. Farmers have invested a lot of money. Members of the community who don't farm have invested a lot of money. When I looked at the National Action Plan for Salinity and Water Quality, the value of investment there was over $1 billion. Would we spend $1 billion if we knew what to do with salinity, if we had a productive answer for salinity? Still expanding. We've noted on farms in the wheatbelt area, particularly on a few catchments that are well known to some of our panel members, who invested their time tirelessly trying to deal with this problem, that salinity is still there. It's still not necessarily managed. Has interest dropped off? Maybe it has in some quarters, but I would imagine just by looking at the number of people here, salinity is still out there, it's still an issue, people still want to know how to deal with it, and we haven't necessarily got that productive answer. Now, we talked about a regional strategy. Salinity requires a whole-of-system response. Do we have a whole-of-system answer to make that a productive landscape? Again, we're still learning, we're still modifying our answers, we're still trying to work out what to do. And I'm sure that Richard George will show a bit later that some of that scruffy land that people might put a few of their woolly sheep on out the back there is no substitute for high-performing cropping areas. It requires management, it requires fences, it requires time. And when we look around at the amount of saline land that's out there now, what's been the adoption level of some of those productive options that we might have out there? Certainly there's some out there, but there's an awful lot of saline land that is not producing anything that we think is comparable to our wheat crops, to our lupin crops. Fencing them off takes time. You don't fence off a little patch here and a little patch there and then get your big gear around it. Some of those options are not easy or reversible. They're expensive, they require technical expertise, you need people out there to give you a hand, you need people who have seen your country for a while to make those applications actually useful to you. I'm sure Max will talk a lot more about that a bit later. Picking up on a few points from our fellow members here. It was stated salinity is a barrier to cereal production. We've had that from our opposition who are trying to tell us otherwise. We can see that the production levels on that land aren't anywhere near equivalent to what we can do on other land. We know that our breeding hasn't got out of the glass house. I think the ongoing times that you drive down the highway and you look out and you see a patch of land at the bottom of a valley slowly moving and go, that hasn't changed, in fact it's got bigger, would really endorse that we don't have answers that make this landscape able to cope with that salinity. So in summary, I think salinity is pretty significant. I don't think we've lost any of our momentum in terms of why and what we want to do with it. We may not necessarily have the year-to-year impetus to do things. We may have had a dry season that's let us just put it on the back burner for a minute, but it hasn't gone away. I think the opposition here is going to struggle to put up a really strong argument that says that salinity isn't a barrier to production, and I shall look forward to their comments. Thank you.